We need to figure out ways to provide experience and daring, risky stuff that feels really thrilling but is not lethal. We've become more and more restrictive in the best ways. Everyone wants their children to be safe and to nothing to happen to them. And that is a very, very important thing to want. But without some exploration of limits and without some chance to sort of explore the world, they're not actually that safe. They end up not making good decisions, not knowing how, not being prepared for things. This is one of those examples I'm sure you guys haven't done here. They're indoor trampoline parks. And our first-year college students very often would rather get buses and go do this on a Friday than party, which is very different from when I was in college, but I'm okay with that. You get to stand around, they play music, you get to show off in front of your friends. Everyone is there. Everyone's gossiping and talking and hanging out, and you get to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And again, you can hurt yourself, but the odds go down a lot more than getting in cars and going places and doing things that are maybe not so great. So what's my final point here? The risky decisions, the big ones in life, rely on experience. And that experience is acquired over time. And it's often acquired through failure. It's acquired through falling off your bike, by getting your heart broken, by saying that wrong thing that you really wish you didn't say in that moment, but that you'll never forget. Those aren't failures, those are guideposts, because they didn't kill you. If you're still here, you haven't failed. Now, you may have had some really trying experiences, and you may have had some setbacks and some things that you weren't happy about. But all those cliches, I would argue, actually have a neuroscientific basis, because every time you don't die, you learn. Brain development is like a ball rolling down a hill. It doesn't roll up, it rolls down. So it's going to keep going. As long as it's going, you're learning. There's no such thing as arrested development. There is aberrant development. You can have that ball bounce around more than it should, but you're going to keep learning. So if you stop seeing failure as failure, but instead as a why did this happen, what pieces of it are useful to think about, what pieces are useful to discard, and how do I move forward? It's not a failure. It's a guidepost. And I would argue that the presence of peers and peer influence often exaggerates and ameliorates, and sometimes the bad part is it can also make it really good if we create those good peer experiences. And again, we can't do it. We can't be in the peer relationship, but we can help create it. One of the examples I think about often, and this is a huge problem that is not part of this talk, but we don't have neighborhoods in our country the way we used to have neighborhoods in our country. And in our neighborhoods, there often was, how many of you grew up in a neighborhood where there were at least one or two old people that were around all the time, that somehow magically knew everybody's last name, and they were always in their window or on their porch or like surveilling somehow. And they're like, I don't know who's there, one of the Baird kids was there, I know that. And you knew you and your friends could get up to a certain amount of trouble, but if you went a little too far, someone was going to rein it in. That's the kind of stuff we've lost. We've lost this sense of like, yes, go run around, get into some trouble. But keep in mind there are going to be a couple of us hanging around, and we're not going to let it get too out of hand. But a little bit is what's going to teach you what you can do and what you can't do. But when we step all the way back, that's not good. When we hyper-control and we hyper-schedule from schoolwork to lessons to sports practice to curing cancer, back to studying for the SAT, then to bed for 5 minutes, then back to school, that doesn't give you an experience library, because I would argue that the functional purpose of all of this is to build the most beautiful library. This is my most beautiful library, where I went to college and where I work, so I'm a little biased. But there are a lot of books in there. And I think if you end up with a brain full of experience, it's like having access to a huge library, because anything you need to know, you can find. Some stuff you can find really easily. Some stuff takes a little longer. But think about what wisdom is in adults. Think about how for those of you who are older, how much less life-ending certain things are. When a younger person says, you're like, oh my God, you're not even going to believe what's happening. I went to the gas station, and I could only put half a tank of gas in my car. And you're like, oh, that must be hard for you. And in the back of your mind, you're like, ooh, they got a long way to go. The older you get, the more volumes you have, the more problems you can solve, the more things you actually feel pretty calm about. Like, no, this will work out somehow, because I know I've got something. I know I've got a book somewhere in here about this. I just got to sit down and think about it a little bit. So I would encourage you to think a little bit about that. Think about how the brain grows organically. We've been raising teenagers as long as we've been around. So it's nothing that we can't do. We just got to think about how to maximize the experience. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you for your time. This is far from a one-woman show. I could not do this work without my amazing students. Thank you for having me.